Yeah, look, it's just an absolute pleasure to be here and chat to you. I do always prefer, I have to say, in-person presentations, so I might be a little bit shabby on the old through a screen when I can't really see you all, but I'll do my very best. And really, what I wanted to do was just share some of my enthusiasm for these incredible animals that we share an environment with, and give you just some little insights from what we're learning from these creatures as we spend more time with them. And really, I think I'm pitching this to an audience, some of whom will be extremely familiar with snakes and very well versed in their behavioral ecology and spatial ecology, and others will be brand new to these animals and maybe carrying a little bit of fear burden around as well. So I just thought I'd pitch this much more towards the latter audience, and we've got lots of time for questions and those people that want to ask more advanced questions of the actual science that we're doing, then there'll be space to do that. So thank you so much to Millie for inviting me along and Landcare ACT. And also just wanted to acknowledge at the start just how much this is a collaborative project and a team effort. As Millie said, even just in her introduction, there's been dozens of people that have helped this project along, and it's really a team community effort, which is really kind of exciting to be part of as a sociologist as well as an aspiring ecologist. So yeah, and I also want to pay special tribute to Hannah Gerke, who is the PhD candidate on this project that has absolutely generated a lot of this content. I'm just going to share very briefly in the first 15 minutes or so. I thought I'd just start with a couple of images there, which I think sum up a lot of the things I want to say about snakes at the grassland-urban edge. So you can see in that left-hand image, there are actually two eastern brown snakes here in a grasslands. I thought it was very appropriate. Thermoregulating together in very close proximity together. And I took that picture myself, and I took it with a perspective of giving you, the audience, a sense of just how well these animals camouflage and inhabit that kind of milieu. It'd be very hard to spot these two large adult snakes, male and female. But that's how they basically have evolved to stay alive and survive in extremely difficult landscapes, changing landscapes, fluctuating climates, extreme kinds of conditions they live within over millions of years here. So just thought it was a really nice illustration of just like how much they thrive in these grasslands sort of habitats, but also the kinds of risks, I guess, of us trampling through those kinds of spaces on our mobile phones and not observing the ground in front of us. And then I've got another picture there on the right-hand side of, I think, a really important one on this topic of one of our track snakes. This is actually Severus in the Strathnairn area, northwest area of Canberra, a brand new suburb that's being developed as we speak. Some of you will know it. And Severus has come down to this kind of artificially made dam to have a drink. Now, where that dam is there, a new school is currently being established. And it's right on the edge of that kind of grassland surrounding that new development. So I guess it just for me is a bit of a metaphor of like, we have very much encroached on these kinds of habitats over time and urbanized them and developed them and sanitized them and domesticated them. And these wild animals are going to continue to visit these areas because this is where they live and have always lived. That school is going to be built right beside where that snake is. And it's going to be inevitable that as that school has populated, there will be lots and lots of snake encounters in that area. So this is the kind of stuff that I think this whole project has tried to better understand and hopefully reconcile a little bit as well. Just to also pay my respects to the Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples on whose country I'm currently situated. And I just wanted to share a couple of really beautiful artworks by two Ngunnawal artists. One's Richard Allen Jr., who made this lovely red-bellied black snake design, which I've proudly worn on one of my T-shirts before, very, very kindly from Richard, and also his dad, Uncle Richie Allen, who's a sanctuary local of the Mulligan's Flat area, Wildbark, and Ngunnawal cultural knowledge holder. And it's been really great over the years as well to build a conversation with Ngunnawal people about what snakes mean, what snakes are, and how they have managed over thousands of years to coexist, live with these animals and understand these animals and study these animals, observe these animals. So I'm hoping that that will build into some of the things that I maybe say as well. So the eastern brown snake, this is what I've been asked to talk about today. My favorite species by a long way, although the tiger snake sometimes gets up there as well, to be fair. But this one in particular is my favorite. And as Millie says, I'm very, I've worked with a snake for almost 10 years now, a long time, mainly in my capacity as a licensed snake handler in the ACT, where I'm called to properties. I may have come to some of your properties online, who knows, and removed a snake that's come onto your property or inside your house or inside your workplace or school, whatever, and then relocated it to another environment that we think is more suitable for that animal to be in. So Pseudonasia textilis is the snake that's really occupied most of my attention from a research perspective as well. And I would describe these snakes as fast-moving, aware, cautious, timid, flighty, opportunistic, sensitive, and lastly, but most importantly, enigmatic. Full of surprises, full of amazing things that they do that I've observed. I've been lucky enough to observe over the years. Now, they are, of course, dangerously venomous, and that tends to dominate their representation in the public imagination, like how venomous they are and how quickly they can inflict lethal harm on people and dogs, whatever. But that's really not what I'm interested in. I'm not interested in that side of them. I'm interested in, how they are culturally constructed and historically constructed. That's the sort of sociology that I do. So how they're represented, how we make sense of snakes, how we perceive snakes, how we mythologize snakes, and we imbue them with meaning and often emotion. But also, I'm really interested in their spatial ecology, their behaviors, as their habitats that they've inhabited and occupied for many millions of years are transformed through human activity, and their habitats are encroached on and contaminated and fragmented. I'm interested in how these animals respond to those kinds of challenges and changes, how adaptive they are, how resilient they are, how sensitive they are, all these kinds of questions, so the ecological perspective, and how they spend their time sort of seamlessly moving between, sort of temperate grasslands and obviously urban edges. So that's what I'm really kind of interested in too. And it's without doubt the case that the eastern brown snake is certainly one of Australia's most feared, if not the most feared snake here. And that's because it has a very interesting reputation that's been kind of constructed over time. It, being seen as an aggressive snake, a hostile snake, a snake that gets in quite a spectacular posture when it's feeling threatened. But we'll talk about that a bit later. But also because it is responsible, the family of snakes, the genus of brown snake in Australia, for the most amount of human fatalities, and certainly I would say dog and companion animal fatalities too. They are the most common and commonly encountered snake in the Canberra region. So they are approximately make up 84% of snake removal call-outs for myself are for the eastern brown snake. And I would say about them, they are very tolerant of human activity to a point. So they have in some ways, managed to adapt quite artfully, quite well to the urban environment as it's been established and come to dominate where these local snakes are living, and are remarkably tolerant of humans being around. But obviously, that's when we respect their kind of personal boundaries that they have. And if we don't respect them, then they might get more defensive and capable of potentially striking and biting us. But that, thankfully, is extremely rare. They're a highly adaptive species and a habitat generalist, and that's something I find really fascinating. You can see this image down here in Australia, the vast area that they are found, the species is found in that vast area of Australia. So they've managed to do quite well in this.
One of the most extraordinary ones I've ever seen.
I just thought I'd play this video
at night in this pool area.
Yeah, I just wanted to play this video. Some of you might have seen it because it has been circulating around the internet recently, and I found this absolutely extraordinary. And I just wanted to sort of share my wonderment for these creatures. I mean, so I rocked up to this call I received from a lady who called me in the morning and said, "Oh, I think I've got a dead eastern brown snake or snake in my swimming pool area. Can you come and check it out?" Sort of thing. I don't know if it's worth you coming. And I sort of said to her, can you see it moving? No, I can't see it moving. It's just sort of floating there. I thought, oh, okay. It probably has drowned, unfortunately. So anyway, I thought, no, I'm going to go and check it out. I'm going to scan it in case it's got a microchip in it, blah, blah, blah. And I just wanted to make sure, because I know when these animals are, not well thermally optimized, that they can go very quiet and dormant. And so I just wanted to check it out, just had an intuition. I want to go and see this. So I went along, and this is what I found, that video you've just seen there, which is an eastern brown snake that has been in that water for at least 14 hours. That sort of fairly cool water, cold overnight temperature, and it's managed to fold its body, contort its body up into like a float device, and actually float and not burn off lots of energy, and therefore, get very exhausted and die and drown. So I find that absolutely remarkable, and I just wanted to share it with you because I think these animals, when we start to look at them with a fresh perspective, they really are fascinating, and they really have so many wisdoms and secrets locked up in that highly evolved body over time, and how they behave and how they act and how they sort of interact with the urban landscape and the grasslands is just absolutely fascinating. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a second as well. Okay, so just to give you a quick overview, we set up this thing called the Canberra Snake Tracking Project in the end of 2020, where we got animal ethics experimentation clearance to study some eastern brown snakes in the ACT, and it was founded by myself and my colleague Alex Borg. And what we did was we wanted to basically increase understandings of eastern brown snake biology and behavior in urban ecosystems. We knew there wasn't much work that had been done on this species in this kind of environment. And so we wanted to sort of add some hopefully increase some understandings of how these animals are sort of surviving and living in urban disturbed environments and urban degraded habitats. And I was really interested, as someone who was moving a lot of these animals around, just to reflect a little bit on what was happening to those individuals that I was releasing in new areas, how they were faring, what their survivability chances were like, and whether I could learn from tracking them better strategies for where I could translocate these animals to. So we might come onto that a bit later. But this project was also really heavily about, as Millie said in her introduction, was really trying to change the representation of Pseudonea textilis in the public's mind by starting to share images of them, videos of them, insights about how they're living and what kinds of pressures they're living under, and what kinds of amazing things they can do, and what their life looks like. Because I really felt that so much of the pathologizing of snakes is because we don't really know much about them. And we don't encounter them very often. When we do encounter them, it's in our backyard, and it's seen as an unpredictable organism and scary and frightening and everything else. And I wanted to sort of start to kind of confront some of that dominant ways of thinking about these snakes as, aggressive and dangerous, and start to add new kinds of narratives to them that were informed by the research that we were doing. So this is some of the objectives of the project. How does translocation affect eastern brown snake movement and survival? Do individual snakes show consistent differences in behavior? Could individual personality relate to movement, survival in the field? Can we use thermal characteristics, predict activity? What insights can we use to reduce the pet snake conflict? And Hannah's been working on some of these really brilliantly in her PhD, and it's getting pretty much at the end of data collection period, and she's now moving into analysis and writing up, which is very exciting. And there will be some cool stuff coming on this, I think, very soon. Okay, and just a little bit about the methods and approach of the project. So we basically have been recording the catch locations of snakes that we collect in the ACT in New South Wales for quite a lot of years now. So we've got a really amazing map of where those kind of heat points are, where these snakes are turning up. And that's been really, really fascinating to us to sort of see the patterns of where these animals are present. And then we've also been microchipping and taking biometric measurements from snakes that we collect. So we now have a database of over 400 individuals that have been microchipped by myself, and we've taken biometric measurements from, so in terms of snout vent length, snout tail length, girth, so body mass of snake, condition the snake's bodies in, injuries, some photographs of the snake, sexing the snake as well, male, female, size of snake, all that kind of thing, weight of snake, and then releasing it to sort of see if we do, start to encounter the same snakes again, how often that happens, and how much they've grown over time, those kind of things. We've also taken genetic samples from those individuals, so we've built up a really cool database to sort of look at population structure and dynamics in the ACT of eastern brown snakes. So how related a snake in Gordon is to one in Western Creek and one in Bonner. and to see if there's some interesting differences in that kind of genetic composition over the geography that we're looking at. Also, obviously, to explore recatch and regrowth rates. So we did 2 years pilot radio tracking in the first couple of years of the project, looking at the viability of different landscapes to track in, getting some baseline data on habitat use, and really focusing mainly on resident and local snakes to build up a picture of how they use habitat. So that just means a snake that we've picked up in a particular area, and we return that snake to exactly the same point with a radio transmitter implanted in its body, and then track it over time to see how it uses habitat and how that varies over time and with factors like seasonality and environmental conditions. The second phase of the project, which is where we've kind of got to now, the sort of completion of that pretty much, is starting to look as well, or we've started to look at behavioral tests to sort of measure if we can sort of see indicators of personality in individual snakes, starting to collect lots of really cool thermal data from them by putting thermal microchips, they're kind of eye buttons basically, surgically implanted as well, alongside the radio transmitter to look at their body temperature over time, which is fascinating, and see if there's thermal preferences different individuals have and what they are. And we've done now over 4,000 geolocation tracking points we've now amassed on a sample of both resident and translocated individuals in sites on the urban nature interface to compare, I should have put urban grassland interface, sorry, to compare movement behavior, condition, and survivorship over time. And you can kind of see just some pictures I've included here, just some of the data collection techniques and some of the cool stuff we've been doing. And you can see that picture of those 4 individual brown snakes there. You can see each one of them actually looks a bit different. And there are different scalation, different eye colors, different sort of, it's like facial structures, black flecks, white flecks on the scales. So really, really, getting this sense that you zoom in quite close into these guys, you start to notice there are lots of individual differences and traits. And we're really interested in, looking at how that maps onto their behavior and how they move around the landscape as well. Differences in that as well. So just a little bit about brown snakes in natural temperate grasslands. So I think it's just really worth saying that these animals are long-standing inhabitants and users of this habitat. We're talking millions of years they've inhabited and evolved within natural temperate grasslands. And they really use, and you can see in some of these pictures here I've included, that one on the top right, for example, they really use this kind of habitat very artfully, very strategically to camouflage and for the resource provision it provides and affords. And you can see in those pictures on the left, you can see an eastern brown snake there. One of our project snakes, Mura, in Gura Nature Reserve, which is a lovely grasslands in the north of Canberra, trying to take down an adult eastern bearded dragon. And Janine Kingston very brilliantly captured this picture. And actually, we found that Mura did not manage to actually ingest this guy. It was just too big a meal, so he couldn't actually eat it. But you've got Hannah's picture here on the left of that, where you can see one of our project snakes there. I think that was maybe Bandit or taking a bearded dragon as well, but successfully managing to eat that bearded dragon. But also, of course, these animals are grassland balancers. That's what their role is in that ecosystem. They are predators, as we can see, but they're also prey. And you can see I've included a couple of pictures there of a redback, actually, going to be basically has overwhelmed an eastern brown snake hatchling by catching it in its web, which is so extremely strong structure, and then obviously will then consume that snake by basically, I believe, sucking the sort of juices of the snake out. Which is kind of incredible, really, to be honest. And also, you've got a brown falcon there taking a brown snake off. It's not my picture, but it's just because very rarely captured these things of actually birds actually taking the snakes. But that was a really cool one that I found. But I guess I wanted to really focus your attention on the fact that these animals belong in these environments, but because of encroachment, the fragmentation, they have been increasingly displaced by the urban fault. So we'll have a little look at that in a second. This is a cool video that Hannah took just to sort of show you how these animals use the grasslands here very, very strategically and artfully, and using their body coloration just to blend in. I mean, look how beautifully blend in that snake is there. I think this is Kawasi, one of the snakes that she tracked over in there, and you can see because she's standing still and not moving around, Kawasi is completely oblivious, or may well be completely oblivious to her being there. And that's Kwasi just found that you guys didn't see, I didn't see, Hannah didn't see, a hole, a burrow that is actually in that grassland that snake is using as a shelter. So that's pretty cool. Okay, let's just want to show you a quick video here. It's quite an interesting one. So this is actually Gary, one of the snakes we tracked in Farrar Ridge Nature Reserve, and this is Gary actually predating on another smaller eastern brown snake in his naturally kind of occurring habitat. Now Gary's one of these classic sort of snakes that's so versatile, is quite comfortable in the grasslands that adjoins the suburb of Farrar, but also finds it makes forays and transits into the backyards of that suburb at times too for resources. So really seamlessly moves between the grasslands and the urban ecosystem. Okay, so this is a cool little thing I'm just going to quickly show you. This just is a quick summary of some of the snakes we've tracked over time and how they have moved around, and just sort of look at. There's actually different types of snakes here. There's both resident and translocated snakes involved in this infogram that we've put together, that Hannah's put together, and you can sort of see just how much time these animals are spending actually in the grasslands, as opposed to, you can see the suburb there of Ginninderry or Strathnairn, and you can see the emerging one of McNamara there, which is all kind of like, it's all sort of bulldozed and is going to be currently being developed, and how these animals are kind of actually avoiding generally much time spent in those kinds of suburban areas and spending most of their time in those grasslands. But there's some really interesting differences, and you can see as well how these animals are moving about, how much they overlap different individuals, and the different sizes of habitat they're utilizing depending on if they're a resident and translocated snake. So there's a lot of information going on here, but it's just more to show you the meta sort of aspect of it, of just how much time these guys are actually utilizing those surrounding grasslands as the core part of their habitat. But you can see some of them are making occasional forays, and this one in particular, Mac, which is this orange one, you can see the top, he was actually caught right in the middle of that new development, literally called out by the construction guys to have him removed because he was right in the middle of their building site. And you can see, even though he's been released back in the grasslands, he's actually orientated back into that building site, despite how risky that is and the fact that habitat has been completely destroyed from that site. But I just thought you'd find that really interesting. This is the kind of data we've been managing to collect, which takes us a lot of time, a lot of effort to be able to produce this kind of data. But it's really, really exciting to look at how these different individuals, and of course, different statuses from resident to translocated, how they are utilizing these kind of hybrid landscapes of urban and grasslands. Okay, so this is just to show you as well, really cool slide that Hannah put together about how Strathnairn has changed over time. And you can sort of see where I'm kind of going here, that this used to be, of course, grassland, and then it changed into sort of like agricultural sort of paddocks and use, and then it becomes sort of urbanized. And just to give you guys a sense of just how much this is, this is actually unfolding as we speak, this kind of slow burn destruction and erosion of this habitat, and how the snakes are being kind of forced to adapt to. And I think this picture is extremely kind of vivid and quite informative. This is a snake I picked up in the middle of the new development, completely disorientated, just cruising through very slowly, going, where is my home gone? It's been completely and utterly bulldozed and flattened. And I find this really quite sad. But people don't think about this kind of process of urbanization and the capitalization of land use. When a snake turns up in their backyard, they just go, "Oh, it's a problem. It shouldn't be here. It needs to go." And what we're finding as snake catchers is that we're having to drive these animals further and further and further away from where they're collected because of these kinds of processes and forces. Okay, just to sort of finish off, this is kind of very much the image that people often have in their heads when they conjure up the idea of an eastern brown snake. This kind of classic, I'm sure many of you will have heard this, or maybe even uttered it yourselves, that these animals, they're aggressive and they'll chase you. And they have this image, and the media very much, unfortunately, often fuels this kind of image of them being dangerous and lurking, waiting to pounce on us, us innocent people and dogs, and kind of headlines like they're the only snakes in the world that regularly kill people in under 15 minutes. Now, To me, that sounds extremely exaggerated and inflammatory and hyperbolic, to be honest, because we know, and you guys all know, that in Australia, probably about 2 or 3 people a year die from snakebite envenomation. And this sort of headline makes it sound like it's an everyday occurrence here. But, very much a negative image that's really come from the colonial past as well of, colonial colonists coming to Australia and imposing their view on what the landscape should look like and what animals should belong in it, what animals shouldn't belong. You can see this really historic, interesting picture where they've basically executed 118 tiger snakes in a 2-hour hunt on the Murray River. I'd be very surprised if you'd find 118 tiger snakes now in 2 hours there. So yeah, massive changes to the landscape through sort of human activity, but these kind of imported views about snakes as being kind of evil and sinister and unbelonging, that really dominates. Okay, Millie, how am I doing for time? I better stop pretty soon, eh? I just wanted to show you, just to sort of juxtapose that. Here's a little video that we made up, just kind of showing an eastern brown snake defensive display when confronted by a moving threat. Now you can see this snake's advancing a little bit towards this approaching threat, but really all the snake is doing here is using its body as a communication tool to say, you are too close, I feel threatened by you, you're a predator of mine, and I'm going to make my body into this kind of vehicle to make you intimidated and to get you to back off so that I can then do this, escape, flee, get out of the way. And I think it's really, really important that people understand what that behavior actually is. People very much interpret it as the snake is aggressive, it's trying to chase me. But actually what the snake is doing is trying to create some kind of distance between it and the approaching threat. Now, I'm going to finish on this little cool video here that is quite cool. That I really love. This is one of my favorite videos. Hannah took this in the Strathnairn area. And this is a very large eastern brown at 1.76 meters long. So this is the kind of one that would instill lots of fear in lots and lots of people around Australia. But watch what it does. It comes up to Hannah. It's just out, following chemoscent trails, looking for food, potentially looking for a burrow, its favorite burrow. And Hannah's standing in the way of that. And what it does next is absolutely fascinating. And notice how still she is. A great lesson for people wanting to learn. And look, it backs up, completely backs up, turns away and goes, I don't like the smell of this thing. Who knows what it recognizes? Does it recognize Hannah as something that has bothered it for a while by tracking it around and putting, devices inside its body? Does it just recognize that smell as being something that it doesn't recognize in the landscape, it doesn't belong, it's going to try and get away from it? We don't know. We're not a snake, so we can't possibly know, but I thought it was really, really fascinating. Just that what you do in that kind of situation affects very much what the snake does next. And I'll just give you another quick example of that this is a snake, just classic, coming out of a bag, right past my dirty boot. And, again, not interested in biting me, a confrontation with me, just wants to be safe and disappear in the landscape. And it really is so important that we kind of understand that it's what we do very much that affects what the snake does. And so if we flap around and you provoke the snake and, intimidate the snake and get into its personal space, yes, it might well then just draw that defensive response that you saw in that previous video. This is kind of a cool little video as well about how these guys have managed to adapt to life on the urban edge by, taking the affordances of human environments in terms of, gaps in brick veneer to escape into for a little refuge for overnight, to a rat that's been attracted to a backyard based on a compost bin or chicken coop, whatever, and it being able to predate on that. And then obviously using the surface, this concrete surface of a driveway as a thermoregulatory point for an overwintering burrow for this large eastern brown snake down a driveway. I love this video in Gordon. But I just think it's really cool to show you that even though we've really encroached on these animals' habitat, we've taken it away, they've lost it, they've managed to somehow find a bit of a niche in a sort of, crossing over into that urban borderland from the natural temperate grasslands. But the problem, of course, is that humans don't want them there and they're not tolerated there. And so these snakes all have to be, in fact, all three of these snakes were removed from that position because of a homeowner not wanting to share space with an eastern brown snake. Okay. So I guess just to sort of say as well, to sort of finish on a slightly more sort of melancholic and note, you know, it's not. I'm not saying it's all rosy that snakes can just move seamlessly between the grasslands and urban environments. In fact, urban environment is extremely hostile for these animals, and so many end up injured or deceased as a result of trying to inhabit, trying to artfully find a gap, space, an edge in this urban human dominated environment. And unfortunately, I've just put some pictures together here to sort of show you the kinds of risks and threats these animals face every single moment they're above the surface of the ground in these kinds of spaces. And that little picture I've put there, a little sort of pastiche of pictures, shows lots of different individuals that we've collected over time, just showing the level of injury burden on their bodies from living in these, really difficult, precarious, constantly sort of transforming spaces and trying to find a niche in there because their habitat has largely gone, been fragmented and eroded. Okay, so I think I'm done there. Yes, I'll stop there actually. I did think I'd have a couple of pictures at the end, but I'll stop there because I think I've said enough. But I'm happy to take any questions on any of the things I've just been talking about.
Thank you, Gavin. My takeaway was the human environment and humans are impacting way more on snakes than the snakes are on humans. Yeah. If you do have a question for Gavin, just unmute yourself, and we'd love to see your face as well if you would like. Chris, do you have a question?
Yes, fantastic talk and fantastic work tracking them. The temperature, optimum temperature for brown snakes. Yesterday was apparently the first day of summer, but you wouldn't believe it. But with the snakes, when do they get, what temperature do they become active?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's really quite remarkable. And this is something we haven't done a huge amount of analysis of the data yet. We've got some great data, but we haven't really drilled into that yet. But we can sort of say that generally they have an optimum body temperature of about 31 to 32 degrees centigrade, and we've sort of seen that in the eye button data. But it can fluctuate from starting the morning at about 14 degrees subterraneously in the ground, where they might be a meter down in a ground burrow. It might be a rat hole, it might be a tree root, a burrow, whatever it might be, cavity in the brick veneer, as we saw. And as that gets warmed by the sun, then obviously the snake appears at the surface of the burrow and then comes out to bask for 15, 20 minutes, whatever it might be, to optimize that temperature, to then start, hunting, foraging, maybe doing nothing, just literally staying at that burrow for several days and doing absolutely nothing, conserving energy and preparing for a shed, digesting a meal. So it's a real fluctuating temperature profile from, so 14 degrees maybe to 31, but they can actually we've actually tracked them reaching up to 39.5 centigrade. Their body temperatures and dropping down as low as about 8 degrees centigrade through the winter. So what's fascinating to me is and this is something I'm really excited about doing, is looking at that kind of winter temperature profile. And we've sort of found that generally these snakes are finding a burrow deep enough down where they can keep a consistent temperature of about 8 or 9 through those colder months. However, in the data, it shows as well those moments through the winter on a fine day, a fine sunny day, where that snake might well come out to the surface of the burrow and just literally thermoregulate for a couple of hours and get their body temperature up to about 25 and then go back into that burrow. So it just goes to show that we have this idea often that snakes go completely dormant through the winter, particularly in a cool climate like Canberra. But actually, we're finding that there's lots of, like with all things with these animals, lots of variation among the species we're looking at.
Thank you.
I have a question. Is there data, or do you have anecdotal evidence that they are becoming more active for a longer period of time with climate change, or is their range changing?
Yeah, that's a fascinating question, Millie. I mean, I suspect the answer is yes. I suspect they will absolutely internalize, embody those kinds of climatic changes, and it will affect their biology. Now we've been doing this for about 4 years, so that is a mere drop in the ocean, of course, to the length of time of these kinds of changes. But we're certainly seeing seasonal variations in habitat use in some individuals. So some individuals, potentially expanding their range size over time, or using different areas in a more concentrated way in different parts of the season or over different years. So, I do think that idea that these animals have got a very defined and stable range probably doesn't completely map onto what we're finding. That the ranges, they certainly inhabit an area, but it might grow or retract depending on lots of different factors: competition, food scarcity, abundance, climatic conditions, urban disturbance. But certainly, I would absolutely say they are extremely sensitive to where they are. That's absolutely, undoubtedly what we found in this project. High levels of fidelity to where they are. But that around the edges of where they are might change as the landscape changes or as climate changes. So I hope I can answer that with a bit more vigor in the next year or so. But we've certainly seen some really interesting, variability within the same individual, but across the individuals that we've been tracking as well.
Thank you.
I've got a question here, Gavin. Can you hear me well?
Yes, can, absolutely.
Amazing, amazing. First of all, great presentation.
Thank you.
Loved every bit of it. Learned so much about it. Bit of a long one. Myself, a few years ago, I was a park ranger in Central Australia. A big part of the role was I was catching snakes within the township. And I did my practice, I did my training of catching snakes safely, and releasing them was on a very cranky, black-headed Western brown snake. It was exhausted, but it was very happy for me to just catch and release and do my training. But it was all about education, educating the community as well. When you interact with the snake, stand still like a tree, the snake will go, the snake will pass, and that was it is. We've moved to Canberra now, and I've got twins, toddlers. Educating them about snakes is very important. Recently, we had interaction with a very fast-moving young juvenile Eastern Brown at Coda, but it was too quick and it just slid under the pram, and it was scary for all of us. We all jumped. We shouldn't be doing that, but luckily the snake did that. And then also, I have noticed where the girls go to childcare, they've got snake fencing all around it. But my question is, how can I educate my kids, first of all, and also the childcare they go to regarding snakes? Because where the childcare is very near to bushland, and snake fencing will not prevent the snakes entering in the vicinity. So what can be done about that kind of stuff,
That's a great, really great question. Great set of observations as well, and really nice to meet you. That's a tricky one. I really believe that we should have snake education across all of Australia's curriculum. And that would include things like snake identification, cultural significance of snakes to First Nations peoples, colonial kinds of perspectives around snakes as well, how they've been treated, how they've been seen in a very kind of like theological way as kind of like, Book of Genesis and the great outsider, the great evil figure, the great corrupted figure, all the way through to the ecology of snakes, the biology of snakes. For the question that Millie brilliantly asked about, like, how can these animals teach us about the everyday emplaced impact of climate change, and how animals can adapt, or how they really, ectothermic sensitive animal can adapt to these kinds of challenges. What can we learn from that? So I really, and that all the way through to obviously snake bite first aid and living safely with snakes and fear of snakes, and how these animals behave differently in different situations. So the snake float, the floating pretzel snake, like these are all amazing things I think kids should all be taught and educated around, because I just think it's that normalization of these animals into our lives that we have to take a step towards. Where it gets very challenging is, of course, around dogs and cats, and pets and that kind of conflict. And that's something I really would love to when I eventually get this all done and dusted and finished, love to do some research on that area of like, what can we do in the urban environment in terms of design, but also training, dog training, for example. Obviously, it comes down to owners, pet owners as well, and how they operate with their pets. But trying to reduce that burden, because I think that's a hidden sort of cost of snake conservation, and also obviously fear of snakes, because a lot of course, people that have got dogs, and some of people might be on the call that have experienced this, have lost a dog to a snake bite, very upset, very traumatized, and unfortunately, the snake is scapegoated and gets the blame. And there's a lot of ill will and ill feeling towards snakes as a result of that conflict. So but so yes, educating kids. I think what you already said was fantastic about the fact that snakes have always been here. They live here. They're trying to find ways around us to sort of survive on a very thin edge and dodge us. And if that real sort of notion of what we do is what affects what the snake does is really powerful. And I think just what you've said about exposing them to snakes through going to the reptile zoo, for example, and going to Jerebumbra wetlands for a little bit and having a walk around there. You'll probably see one, Gura Yuru Nature Reserve. I just think that, and just watching and observing the snake and how it moves and what it does and how aware it is and how present it is and how it senses. It's just such a powerful way of understanding these animals are not out to get us. They are really remarkable, and they're such an important part of our ecosystem. They're playing such an important balancing role in there, as I've sort of alluded to a bit earlier. And so when you spend that much time around them, and I know that some people on the call have definitely done that, that you really see the world anew, and from the snake's perspective. So all I've been trying to do is, in my work, is trying to sort of see the world from the snake's perspective, and I think that's really powerful. So I hope that answers your question, but I just think, that encounter with snakes in a safe way, and then out into the wild and encounter with snakes where they're just, you're expecting to see one, and when you do see one, you know exactly what you're doing, and knowing about snakebite first aid in the worst case scenario is all kind of part of that story. Great question, though. Thank you.
Hi, Gavin. It's Mish here. How are you?
Hi, Mish.
You mentioned that, like obviously with the development that's going on, that you're finding that some snakes you have to take even further and further away.
Yes.
Do you find then when you track those snakes that they attempt to try and come back, or do they just blend in?
Yeah, so that's a great question. How long have we got? We've got like 2 minutes. But it's such a great question, and it's just the one that's been animating our attention for a long time and causing us a lot of distress. Because I just think that the simple answer to your question is, it's extremely variable, the outcomes of translocation. It's an extremely complex activity. Moving a snake from point A to point B seems very simple on paper, but actually there are so many extraneous factors that are incorporated in that move. Like, what time of year did you collect the snake? What size is the snake? What sex is the snake? What condition is the snake in? How much carrying capacity does that new habitat have for that snake to go into? Individual personality. I mean, personality, I know it's not everyone's favorite term for animals, but it's kind of what the ecologists call it, personality. But we might want to say individual differences in these animals as cognitions and preferences for food types. All of these things, the weather, the amount of stress the snake is under when it's caught and then released. All these factors, I suspect, have impact. What we have definitely found is the translocated snakes certainly move more and a lot further than the resident snakes that we've tracked. That's been absolutely what we've found. Now, we did have an extraordinary case. I love the extraordinary cases because I know it gets us excited about snakes as well, where one of the snakes called Titan was moved about 5 kilometers from where he was caught on a residential street in McGregor. He was taken 5 kilometers south of that and released into grasslands. And within about, I think it was 60 days, don't quote me on that because I've a lot of things in my head at the moment, but about 60 days, he had returned to that area where he was collected from. Not the exact point, but very proximate to where he was collected on that call out. And the question I have for all of you is, how did he do it? How was he able to find his way back there? Was it purely random, or were there celestial cues? Were there chemical cues, no doubt, in the environment that he was following to be able to find his way back to that range, that what we call the home range? So that for me, that's been one of the exceptional tales from the project, is how did Titan do that? We've had other snakes we've moved similar kinds of distances, similar kinds of circumstances, have not managed to find their way back, and have just, to be honest, most of them have appeared quite lost and disorientated and moving quite erratically. Now, some of them have managed over time to settle down and I think re-establish a range, an available kind of niche area in that new environment. But unfortunately, I think, we have found that the majority have really struggled with that translocation over the time that we've looked at that activity. Obviously we can't track snakes forever. We have to draw lines what we can and can't do. We've done our very best with limited resources to do what we've done. But I think, yeah, certainly for me, it's got something to do with what habitat you're taking that animal into, as well as that individual animal's own, individual kinds of orientations that will affect, the success or failure of the translocation, I think.
Yeah. And do they tend to be like a bit territorial? So if you put like a random snake into another snake's territory, like, do they, are they going to have altercations, or is it? You haven't. I mean, that's probably another field of study. And again, it's endless.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, like, I guess I just feel. I think I'm going to be honest and say that the more you work with these animals and the more you know them, the sort of the more questions you have about their lives and about how they operate. And I really feel that this project has just thrown up even more questions. And one of the key ones that you've just alluded to is snake sociality. That's something I'm extremely interested in. We don't know hardly anything about how these animals relate to each other. So sort of interspecies and intraspecies. So, are there kin relations that exist in species? So could they recognize snakes that they're related to in a habitat?
Yeah.
Here's a fascinating point I'm going to make, folks. Like a couple of observations on that. Oh, you might want to mute your mic, Mish. I think it's just
sorry.
background. There we go. Just a couple of quick observations. I could talk about this all day as well. But anyway, one of them is that we have found now in 2 different places in Canberra, in the grasslands, communal oviposition sites. So this is very significant. This is where a group of females, up to 6 or 7, will congregate at this particular burrow area and come together and basically bask on top of each other, hang out in the same burrows and lay their eggs in there. And that's something that we're sort of fascinated about. How related are those females to each other? Are they aunties, sisters, mother, daughter? Again, putting into human language, but I'm doing my best. But are they familiar with each other? Are they choosing and selecting that site because it's the thermal properties of those burrows are perfect for the incubation of eastern brown snake eggs? Is it habit, a tradition? Where the snakes themselves, where did they emerge and hatch in that area? The other one is we have absolutely got conclusive evidence of translocated snakes we've moved to new environments that have managed to successfully breed with other conspecifics in that new area. So to me, that's to answer your question, those snakes have sort of shown signs biologically that they have somehow managed to kind of, exist in that new space by being able to mate. Now, we've also found snakes that have been moved to new areas that have really not done very well. And they've declined, their body condition has declined significantly as a result of that move to the new habitat, whether that's to do with food preferences, carrying capacity, or maybe some kind of social structure. That's a really fascinating question. It's like I'm really fascinated in trying to theorize around. So great question. I noticed there's 2 more up, so I better move on. But thank you. Just to say it's very complex, extremely variable, the kinds of outcomes of that activity.
We've also got a couple of questions on the chat, so we might go quickly to these guys and then I'll read out some questions. So as quick as we can, I think. So maybe Sybil, if you want to start.
Oh, hi. It's actually Mitchell Kelly here. I'm just using Sabelle's laptop because mine's too old to do Zoom. Thanks so much, Gavin. That was a great talk. I sort of got the willies a bit when I saw the photo of the eastern brown devouring a rat because of the widespread use of second generation anticoagulant rodenticides now. Are you seeing that starting to impact eastern browns as much as it's impacting the other wildlife that are getting the secondary catch of it?
Yeah, it's such a great question. I really appreciate you bringing that up. Yes, we're certainly seeing some evidence. I mean, it's tricky because it is that kind of bioaccumulating property that it has. So it may be the case that an eastern brown snake can eat several contaminated mice or rats and kind of just be kind of on the surface okay, but inside its body and the sort of the organs are kind of, all uh, degrading inside. I mean, it's difficult for us to observe that. Have I picked up quite a lot of emaciated snakes over the years? Absolutely. What are some of my senses of why they're emaciated? Well, it is really difficult to tell because you kind of have to take either fecal samples from that snake or ideally liver samples to be able to trace the rodenticide load. But my sense is just purely based on my intuition, working with these animals for a while, and we are doing a very small project that's being led by some other colleagues. Damien Latouf is one of them. He's over at CSIRO in Perth. Also, Hannah's involved, and a guy called Chris from New South Wales, toxicologist. Starting to do a mini study to do a little kind of sweep of some of the scat we've collected from some of the track snakes. What rodenticide load can we detect in there, if any? And also, we're starting to collect some livers from deceased snakes from roadkill to be able to do some analysis of that. Because I'd love to answer your question as they would. I'm not a toxicologist, so it's not my forte, but I'm fascinated, as you rightly say, in that food web contamination, and I suspect it's quite high. Research has certainly shown in Western Australia that reptiles were very, very affected by rodenticide in the food web. So I'm going to say absolutely yes. So thanks for the great question.
Right, thank you.
Stephen, I think you've got your hand up. Sorry, apologies for the delay.
Thanks, Gavin. Great presentation. Quick questions on based on my curiosity. Is it true that thick clothing helps protect against snake bites?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So definitely. So the answer is absolutely. So a couple of things I'll say about that. One is PPE is just absolutely critical. So when you're out in those grasslands, I'll show you some lovely pictures of our amazing grasslands that we have around us. When you're walking through that long grass, I know it's a bit of a cliche metaphor, snakes in the grass, but they really do utilize that grass a lot of the time. They use it for crypsis so they can camouflage, blend in seamlessly. And, I have had many, 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 many encounters over the years doing the tracking where, I've been tracking Gary over there or Tyrone over there or Bev, and I've been walking up to that snake and I haven't noticed there's another snake right in front of Bev that's in the long grass. So that personal protective gear is really going to be effective against an eastern brown snake bite. Why? Because their fangs are generally small. If you've got jeans on and thick socks and gaiters, that's going to be a great defensive seal, and you're not going to be envenomated by that snake in that kind of situation if you've got your boots on as well. The other thing to say is about clothing is there's been some great research done by Pat Whitaker and Rick Shine that was quite a long time ago, which showed that it's really advisable to wear dark colors when you're out in the bush walking. Why? Because the contrast, again, we're assuming it's a nice sunny day as it is just now out there, looking out the blue sky. The contrast, the snake is able to really detect more effectively that contrast in light and see the darker silhouette appearing, and therefore likely, utilize its lightning speed to take off. Now, sometimes we know, again, with a lot of experience, these animals will decide not to shoot off and use the lightning speed, conserve the energy, and use their camouflage in that grassland as that kind of defensive barrier. And they will let you get very close to them potentially, where they'll just be all coiled up, hoping that you just walk past. You just have to be aware of that kind of situation. And really, my advice to everyone is ideally stick to the tracks where possible. And if you're going off piste, then you need to be, prepared with snakebite first aid, a working personal locator beacon or mobile phone for signal, and obviously your personal protective equipment on would be ideal. Great question, though. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. We're a little bit over time, but there's some great questions I'd love to read out to you, Gav, from our chat. So I think it was Mitchell again asked, is ACT government doing anything in response to your research and the need to protect snakes with so much continued urban development?
That's a good question. Yes, they certainly are, I think, interested in, and they have funded, I must say, credit to the ACT government. They did give the Canberra Snake Tracking Project 2 environment grants, which basically gave it sustainability and got us over the line to be able to do what we've done. So credit to them. They have funded it for 2 years, which is wonderful. And they are, I think, very interested in the findings, and so when they get published, and we've been kind of doing lots of mini kind of little science communication things, and working with government agencies as well. So yeah, there's definitely interest in it. I think mainly from the perspective of snakes as being a risk. I think we still have got a long way to sort of understand snakes as being value, as valuable, as entities we need to look after and care for. I know that sounds a bit weird to talk about snakes in that way, but I really, really, when you work with them this much and you see them in so many different perspectives, and see the kind of condition of their bodies over time, you'd see where I'm coming from. It's just out of care for their well-being and welfare. So I would like to see them, more protected through education, and I think they're open to these things. So I'm going to be glass half full, which is rare for a Scotsman, but I am, and say yes. I'm hoping that some of the findings will really generate some excellent implications and outcomes and conservation outcomes, and that's why we're doing it, because we care about these snakes. We think they're amazing, and we just want more people to understand them better. I think that will be great for our community.
Thank you. Linda has asked a similar question. Is there an opportunity to provide information to communities in new suburbs, aiming to use proactive approach on education about snakes and other reptiles that will be encountered?
Such a great question, Linda. Yes, and the answer is yes, yes, yes. So I recently put together a little, tiny little kind of fact sheet that very amazingly got taken up by the real estate industry in Canberra. They met with me, the sort of head of that organization, and we're happy to include that leaflet in the sort of blurb that new tenants and new owners get of properties. So that's a tiny little step, yes, but it's a start. Like trying to give them a sense of what reptiles we share the habitat with and environment with, what to do when you see one, why you don't always need to call a snake catcher, and also that kind of question about people living on those edges of the suburbs where we know that's the most concentrated place of snake encounter, that they have to accept they've bought there, they live there, they rent there, they are going to have these kinds of interactions, and they need to know what to do in the case of when they happen and how to manage them safely and effectively. And so yeah, I've tried to design those little leaflets with that in mind, but there's so many other amazing people around Australia that are doing this work on, cool Facebook pages and groups that are educating all the time Australians at scale on what snakes we live with, what reptiles we live with, and why they're so remarkable. So I'm just a tiny piece in this massive sort of wall of people trying to just change perceptions, and it's a real privilege to be involved in that community to do that work.
Lovely.
Yeah,
and lucky, sorry, Linda, we're just running out of time. I'm just conscious we've got two more questions.
That's okay.
So the last one's Miriam has asked, do you have any data on the survival rates of snakes that are relocated? And Marinda has asked, should we report dead snakes for research, and if so, how?
Yeah, thanks for those two great questions. So we do have data on the survival rates of snakes. So that will be reported very soon in a forthcoming publication on that kind of analysis of like resident to translocated survivorship rates. I should note, Miriam, that's a really great question, but there is sadly, because of the threats, the risks that I've alluded to, the hostile land that they live on, even in resident snakes, there's a high death rate because of all of those everyday dangers that are lurking in the environment for them to navigate. So it's quite a depressing stat, to be honest. It's fairly comparable in our project so far between resident and translocated, the survivorship rates, but there are definite differences in how much movement translocated are doing, and how that movement appears on a graph, on a map. The fact they're moving more in an unfamiliar landscape means they're more vulnerable to that predation risk because of the fact they're out more, they're burning off more energy, maybe not hunting as effectively, etc. So it's a complex thing, but just to say, I think the answer to that question is both groups face high levels of risk in their lives. And then the last one was, yes, absolutely, Marinda, it would be great. It's a bit depressing for me, to be honest, but it is an important part of the research to work out snake mortality in the ACT. And obviously, now that 400 individuals have got microchips in them. They're out circulating around the ACT as we speak. Many of which will probably be dead by now because of the things I've described. But those that are living or those that are dead, I want to be able to scan them with an RFID scanner, which I have, to be able to see if there's snakes we've caught before and microchipped to get that data. So absolutely, please report them to myself, and we'll try and get someone there to pick the snake up and obviously collect potentially the liver from it as well if we're doing the rodenticide work. So yes is the answer. Thank you.
Oh, well, we might have to end it there. As Linda said, I think we could go on all afternoon. So I just want to say thank you so much, Gavin. And where can people contact you and learn more about the Canberra Snake Tracking Project?
Yeah, thanks everyone. Really, really lovely response. Thank you for your questions. So Canberra Snake Tracking Project has a Facebook page. It's been a bit slow in recent terms on there, but there's great information on there, and all the papers that we publish will be sort of broadcasted through there. But also you can just email me at gavin.smith@anu.edu.au if you'd like to come out and do a little bit of tracking just for a bit of experience, as Millie did, as Linda did, as many others have done. I found that, I think, really quite transformative, actually seeing the snakes in situ in those habitats and just observing what they're doing and where they are and moving around. It's just so uplifting and kind of an epiphany kind of moment for taking down that fear of snakes. They're not going to come chasing after you. So just seeing them, hanging out and, engaging in their habitats, is really, really great. So feel free to do that. But yeah, mainly Canberra Snake Tracking Project page, and hopefully there'll be some papers coming out fairly soon on these things I've been talking about in a bit more depth as well. Thanks,
Wonderful.
everyone.
Thank you,
Thank
Gavin.
you.
Thank you all.